For example, a lot of people are afraid of spiders. So if this was in some way kind of causing you distress in your life or making it hard to function day to day, then you might want to go to therapy for that. And the therapist might work with you to create a list of things that would be anxiety or fear producing for you, from the least scary to the most scary, right? And with a therapist, you would go through these probably over several weeks or maybe several months to get more and more realistic. And each time you pair it with either relaxation techniques, positive associations, but in some way you're breaking that fear conditioning, right? You're breaking that association that you learned before and creating it. Probably in all of psychology, one of the most successful things that we can treat are phobias because of their background in learning and what we know about learning. Alrighty. And I think just to give another example, I think we started talking about how ant abuse, the drug, might not be effective in preventing people from drinking alcohol. And just one more example, this one is something that happened to someone in my family, my brother. So he used to bite his nails. He actually still does bite his nails. He's like, I don't know, 30 now. So when he was little, one way we would try to stop him from biting his nails was to put on this nail polish that's called Bite It. Has anyone heard of it or seen it before? So it's supposed to taste really nasty when you put your fingers in your mouth. It's supposed to kind of taste like vomit or something like that. So the idea behind it with learning is if you put something nasty in your mouth, that should deter you from putting your fingers or your nails in your mouth, should stop you from biting your nails. But it doesn't always work, right? So people can get used to the taste. They might even start liking the taste, whatever reason. What they're getting from biting their nails is so strong that it can override these more negative associations. So it didn't work in this case, unfortunately. Maybe if you would have went to therapy and worked a little bit more on it. I don't know. All right. Any questions about classical conditioning before we move on to another type of learning?
Like in the military, where high stress occupations and stuff. One kind of training that they do is exposing people to falsified high stress scenarios with everything present except the actual possibility of danger. Would that be considered form of conditioning, because it's meant to get people used to it, so that when a real scenario
Yeah, I think it's similar. You have that desensitization aspect to it. So if it is a high stress situation, that they're getting used to it. So it's not causing the same maybe sympathetic nervous system arousal. Yeah, so they are used to it. I don't know if I would call it classical conditioning, but it is in a similar vein. Yes, yeah, good example.
I was just gonna say, I was a nail biter for probably 18 plus years, and then it wasn't the exact same, but I got a nail polish that tasted like chemicals. It was even if you just go like this, you can taste it. It's disgusting. So it worked though.
It worked
I don't
for
bite
you.
my nails anymore. So.
And you might have had some additional motivation why you didn't want to. So there is some psychological components perhaps.
Yeah,
too.
for sure.
But yeah, it can work.
It can.
Can work.
Can confirm.
Good point. All righty.
Yours.
Yes. All right, so let's switch gears to another type of associative learning. We're still looking at pairings, but this time we're looking at operant conditioning. Okay, so before it was classical conditioning, this is operant conditioning. It's also known as instrumental conditioning, in case you see that word. All right, so we are now talking about our own behavior as humans and some event in the environment. And usually we will increase or decrease our own behavior according to the consequences or the benefits of that event. All right, so a couple things to note just up top about operant conditioning. we have to think about all of the potential options that are in our environment. So with our behavior, right, we might choose to do one thing, or we might choose to do something else. So it's operating within that broader umbrella of choices that we have. Okay. All right. Number 2, responses can be under stimulus control, and what this means is it depends. It depends on the environment. So if one context or one type of environment is especially reinforcing, right, that's great. We might increase our behavior in that situation, but we might encounter something very different where the same behavior might have more negative consequences, right? So we might decrease our behavior in that situation. So it can depend. And again, we kind of have control over that. And then number 3, reinforcers are not made equal. So reinforcers are things in the environment that are more or less valuable to us based on our preferences, our interests, our experiences. Some people, for example, are really motivated and reinforced by money, others not so much. So it's a personal thing in terms of what you are reinforced by. How many people, when you were little, you got like money for getting good grades in school? That's one type of reinforcement. Another one, anyone want to guess like other types of reinforcers that aren't money that you could?
Token economy.
Token economy, what does that mean?
It's what they do in schools.
Yeah.
Like they give out fake money for like parents' toys or something like that.
Yeah. So if you're doing great in the classroom, you're sharing or you're being cooperative, you might get some points, and eventually you can turn those points into like a toy or a piece of candy or something like that. Yep, exactly. Yeah, we have more examples of that. It's a very good one. What else?
Like incentives, like giving a dessert after dinner if you finish all of it, or like candy if you
like a
behave.
dessert, especially if it's like sweet, someone has a sweet tooth. Yep, good. Yeah, it wouldn't work the same as for most kids if we wanted to give them broccoli as a reward or incentivizer. Anything else like you got from maybe your parents or family for getting good grades or doing something good?
Just like praise.
Praise is incredibly powerful.
Good job. That's
Yes.
like a big deal to a lot of kids.
It is. It doesn't have to be money. It doesn't have to be anything except just approval or love and affection sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a lot of times all that's needed. Yep. Okay, good. All right, so let's start off thinking about operant conditioning with something called the law of effect. This was by Edward Thorndike, and it basically says that if we experience positive outcomes in the environment, we are more likely to increase whatever behavior is associated with that. Whatever behavior caused that positive outcome, we're going to increase it because we like getting positive outcomes. And the same for negative outcomes, right? If we experience a negative outcome for something, we're going to probably decrease that behavior, not do it as often because we don't like that negative outcome. Okay, so in other words, when behavior is rewarded, we're going to repeat that behavior or increase that behavior. And when behavior is punished, we're going to ideally, hypothetically, decrease that behavior, lessen that behavior. Okay, it's this whole idea behind reinforcement. All right, so let's look at some early psychology experiments on reinforcement. Okay, so Edward Thorndike, you just saw the law of effect. He started off studying animals, different kinds of animals like cats, for example, and putting them in kind of a puzzle box. So this box would have different things in it, like different levers and strings, and the positive consequence for the cat, if they figured it out, would be they get some food. So they would learn by trial and error. They would kind of just move around this box at random and kind of eventually maybe accidentally touch a lever or pull the string, right? And then a little pellet would come out, a food reward. So they would start to learn that association. If I press this button or this lever, then I get some food. And as soon as they learned that, they would start repeating the behavior, right? Other times it was like they would be able to get out of the box if they figured out how to open it up. So that would be reinforcing for them. Okay. All right. And then kind of along the same lines, B.F. Skinner and other behavior psychologists studied reinforcement in terms of what is known as a Skinner box. So it's named after him. This time, looking at different rates of reinforcement, so that was his contribution, is like, how can we predict how people will, or animals will respond the most? So what can we do to really promote the most consistent, the most high responses? Now, let's say it was a rat. Rats were used in Skinner's box. So there was some positive reinforcement, again, where they would get food. He worked with pigeons. I'll show you a video in just a second, but like pigeons would get food. But he also added some punishment. So what would happen is, and hopefully it's not too negative for you all, but if it is, you're welcome to step out. But the rats would be in this cage, and there would be an electrified grid at the bottom. Okay, so they would turn on this switch, and it would become, the ground would basically become electrified. So it would be like it was being shocked. It was painful for them. So they would move around, like trying to get out of this electrified grid. And they might eventually accidentally, just like here, press something, press a lever, press a button, or pull a string to stop the electrical grid, so to turn it off. And they were able to find that, right, they would learn that association, how to remove the negative. Okay. In this case, it's how to like continue a positive, right, how to keep getting fed. In this case, it's like, how do you remove something bad that's happening to you? How do you learn that association? So we're going to see both examples of positive and negative types of reinforcement. Yeah.
Like, I'm not disagreeing. Basically, I am guessing that this does have implications for humans, but is there any verification that this actually has any implications for human behavior? Because
yeah,
I would say that rats and humans are quite different.
That's a good question. And especially some of this early research, it led to the idea of learned helplessness. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, but it's this idea if you continuously have a negative outcome and there's no way you can control it, or you haven't figured out how to control it, you'll just give up. And it's kind of been the basis of like theories for depression and other things in humans. But that research is kind of even being questioned now in terms of whether it is true. Like, what are the conditions around that? So I think to answer your question, yeah, there might be some ways that it does apply and some ways that it doesn't apply. We did learn a lot about reinforcement schedules, which we're going to talk about, which apply to both humans and animals. And they've taken off in various ways in consumer psychology. So yeah, I know. It's interesting because they aren't like very similar to us, but they still are rewarded by a lot of the same things, like food, right? We all are incentivized by food and shelter, safety, right? Those kinds of basic needs that we might share. Humans might have some more specific ones, maybe like psychological needs for cognition, that kind of stuff. But maybe at that very basic level. What do you think? Any thoughts?
I mean, I don't know. Personally, I think that what this specific experiment has taught us is that rats will respond in the way that they have been reported to, and I don't think it necessarily has any implications outside of humans.
One area, we have a whole unit on memory, but that's another area where they've used a lot of animals to try to see, because they can reproduce way quicker than us and like go through multiple generations, like can we train a rat to run through a maze, and can that be transmitted to their offspring? So their offspring have like a leg up in terms of running that maze. And it kind of is really interesting to see like intergenerationally how memory might be transmitted. So maybe different areas that we haven't got to yet. Yeah.
I kind of feel like that this experiment kind of works for any living animal. I mean, I feel like if anything's getting shocked, they're gonna try and figure out how to stop it.
Yeah, try as much as you
Yeah.
can. Yeah. Good point.
just thought it was interesting. I don't know if anyone has watched the new like Star Wars TV show Andor, but in the first season, the like, writers of the show combined the idea of the Skinner box with the philosophical thought experiment that's based in psychology and Panopticon to create the storyline for one of the parts of the series where they locked Rebels in like a prison, right?
Okay.
So they were using psychology to drive the story and as well as like to provide a metaphor for, society and critique of political systems. I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah.
They like drew on that.
How they, like,
how it
yeah.
affected people.
How-
So the same way.
And it's an application then.
Yeah.
Nice. Good example. Okay. All right. So I'll show you that Skinner box example in just a moment, but just to introduce some more terms in terms of reinforcement. So we can have a primary reinforcer that is something kind of like, for all animals, it's naturally reinforcing. So again, things like food, it can be sex, right? Any like our kind of basic needs as humans. Then there's a conditioned or secondary reinforcer. This is something that by itself maybe doesn't have any meaning, but it is associated with one of the primary reinforcers. So going back to that money example, right? Money's just a piece of paper. Like it's nothing, like we can't eat it and get substance. It's nothing that will satisfy a basic need, but the meaning we ascribe to it, where we can trade it for food or something else, is where it gets its value as a reinforcer. Okay. And then we're going to see examples of different reinforcement schedules. So there are continuous reinforcement where it's predictable. Basically, we see the response every single time. Every time you pull the lever or push the lever, you get a pellet. So that's continuous. And then there's also partial or intermittent reinforcement, and that is where you don't get a reward or every time, right? So you may push the lever and then one time like a food pellet doesn't come out, and then the next time you push it and then the pellet comes out, and then it's kind of a variable thing over time. Okay, so what people like Skinner were doing was try to look at these different schedules here and see which one was most rewarding, which ones would produce the highest rates of reinforcement. Okay, so Skinner identified 4 different partial reinforcement schedules. I'll give you an example of each one, or maybe you can give me an example. So the first one is a fixed ratio. After a certain number of responses, you're going to get rewarded. Can anyone think of an example? Maybe like a punch card. You go to your favorite coffee shop, right? Or like me with my dog food. Every bag of dog food I get a stamp, right? And then when I get 10, my 11th bag is free or something like that. Okay, so that's a fixed ratio responding pattern. A variable ratio pattern is when you are still reinforced, but it's after an unpredictable number of responses. So you don't know when it will be. You'll eventually get it, but you don't know when. So some people think this is really exciting, right? Like the best example of this is gambling. Like if you're on a slot machine or something like that at the casino, and you're pushing the buttons and like you're not getting anything, and then all of a sudden you might get that specific match, right, that you need to win some money. So highly responsive, highly rewarding for a lot of people. Okay, a fixed interval is reinforced after a set amount of time. So like a month, like say every month you might get a bonus or a little bit increase added to your salary or something like that. That would be a fixed interval. And then a variable interval would be, you're still reinforced, but it's after a unpredictable amount of time. So after so long has passed, you don't know when it's going to be, you're going to get rewarded. This one's a little bit harder to think of. The best example I have is like social media, maybe like, Instagram or some similar app that you're using is like, you're scrolling, you're on it for like 5 minutes, maybe there's nothing particularly rewarding, but then once in a while there is something that just really makes you laugh, right? Or like you can really resonate with, or it's helping your mental health, or you're getting some good information, or whatever it is. So that's also reinforcing, right? Like, okay, if I'm on there 15 minutes a day, I know I'll probably come across at least one thing that was really reinforcing for me. Okay. All right. So let me show you a video of B.F. Skinner and his pigeons here. So you're going to see the different reinforcement schedules going on. You're going to actually see the Skinner box and what happens. Hopefully it's not too loud.
Can pigeons read? This one gives every indication, because he's been taught to distinguish between two words and to behave appropriately. He's learned his different response to each sign by being rewarded with food. So the bird isn't acting independently. Its behavior is shaped by controlling its environment. The first task was to isolate an individual piece of behavior and see how that could be changed. Skinner did this by keeping individual pigeons at about 3/4 of their normal weight, so that the birds were always hungry, and food could be used as an automatic reward.
Birds.
The pigeon was studied in a uniform box, one it quickly grew used to. One piece of behavior, pecking a coloured disc, was measured on a graph. The pigeon learned that pecking the disc produced a reward. Then the behavior of pecking could be studied in relation to how often that reward was offered. Or in Skinner's terms, what was the schedule of reinforcement?
The main thing is what we call schedules of reinforcement. Reinforcement is what they can call reward, and you can schedule it so that a reward occurs every now and then when a pigeon does something. We usually use a response with a pigeon pecking a little disc, spot in the wall, and you can reinforce with food. But you don't reinforce every time, perhaps every 10th time, or perhaps only once every minute or something like that. There are a very large number of schedules, and they have their special effects. And there is a good example of how you can move from the pigeon to the human case, because one of the schedules is very effective with rats or pigeons is what we call the variable ratio schedule, and that is at the heart of all gambling devices and has the same effect. The pigeon can become a pathological gambler just as a person can. Now, the fact that we found that out with pigeons and could prove it by removing and changing the schedule makes it easy for us to interpret the case with the human subject. We don't say that the human subject gambles to punish himself, as the Freudians might say, or gambles because it feels excited when he does so. Nothing of the sort. People gamble because of the schedule of the reinforcement that follows, and this is true of all gambling systems. They all have variable ratios built into them. So what we've learned from the pigeon, it made it possible to interpret this fast field very effectively.
Where does that leave free will? Because we all think we have a choice whether to do things or not.
Right. I'm going to stop it there just for time, but that is B.F. Skinner. You didn't recognize him.
He looks evil. He looks evil.
Does it bring about like a mad scientist vibe with glasses or what in the lab coat?
Just the not feeding the pigeons kind of thing. It's just.
Oh, okay. So you know what? Let's talk a little bit about application, because not all of this is like, oh, we're learning stuff about humans. We're also learning stuff about animals, because humans interact with animals quite a bit. So it's actually common, like in environments where animals are being trained to like do certain things, that they will keep them 3/4 of the way hungry, right? So they're like motivated by food. They're like extra motivated by food. It's already a primary reinforcer. But is anyone like familiar with that? I know like they do that in falconry sometimes. I'm guessing other types as well, but yeah. Okay. So one thanks, Paul, you gave already the second example here, but we can use something like a token economy that's direct application of operant conditioning. It works with all children. It might work especially well for children who have special needs or developmental disabilities or delays in terms of like motivating certain behaviors over others, right? Rewarding the positive behaviors. And another really big application area is training animals. So clicker training, has anyone done that with one of their animals? How does it work?
So I actually trained chickens
Okay.
with clickers.
Yeah.
And it basically you have this clicker. It's louder than you think it'll be, and it looks something just like that. And the button like clicks this metal thing, and it makes this really loud click. And once, like literally the second they do the thing you want to see, like you might have steps for like what you want to see, and you work your way up to what you want. And
Great.
because you can't like get the food in their mouth like that millisecond, the click is the indicator that they did the right thing.
Yeah.
So like they might switch activities really fast, so you click just to show them, oh, that was the thing,
Yes.
and then you give them the food.
Perfect. Can you give one example of something you wanted the chicken to do that you were shaping?
Yeah, we it was a lot more complicated than this, but we were trying to get it to it was a very young chicken. We were trying to get it comfortable like jumping off of a higher surface and using its wings. And so every time it would jump and flap its wings, we would click and give it like a treat. And then if it would do the whole thing, we would give it a higher reward.
Perfect. Yeah, so you got a lot of things going on with this example. The first thing is shaping. So if there's a behavior that you want to happen, that you want to continue happening, likely it won't happen like immediately. So what you'll have to do is start off with anything that closely approximates the behavior you want and like reward that. And you get closer and closer, right? You don't reward it if it's like farther away, but you do reward it if it's a little bit closer to what you want. So that's called shaping. And then you also mentioned like the size of the reward. So often like I hear people call like a jackpot for like a really big reward when they do exactly what you want when you want it, right? So great. Works with, I'm sure, a lot of different types of animals. They use it to train marine mammals as well. So you have another example?
Yeah, I trained my aquarium cat to eat out of my hand instead of just dropping it in the tank.
Okay, so how long did that take to learn, would you say?
For a while.
A while. Okay, but you were persistent with the rewards?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay,
I
good.
tried to activate. First thing I did was activate by putting my hand. I have a large tank at home where I grew up in San Diego, so I would put my hand near the tank, and then in the tank to get used to it, right? And then I would start putting like zucchini in my hand, right? Because they like that. It's considered like a treat. They're algae eaters.
Yep. So
The response from the food would override the response from fearing for an object in the tank.
yeah.
And eventually I could get to it.
Good, yeah, so there's probably a little bit of desensitization going on there too, where it's getting used to this like foreign object or your hand in the tank, right? And then it's also getting rewarded. Good. So those repeated pairings over time are the very key part, the important part. All right, I'm gonna come back. I know I skipped a couple slides. I'll come back to those. But something to note for both types of associated learning, so classical and operant conditioning, they both, the behaviors can be extinguished. I think I mentioned this last time. So if at some point you kind of stop altogether any kind of reward or reinforcement, the conditioned stimulus is not always presented with the unconditioned stimulus, right? You lose that important pairing. Over time, the behavior will become extinct, or you won't see that behavior anymore. So in terms of Pavlov's dogs, if, right, you ring the bell and then over time they never got any food, right, they would kind of unlearn that response. They would be like, oh, well, the bell doesn't mean I'm getting food anymore, right? Because now there's been all these times when it didn't happen. So we call that extinction. it's maybe not completely unlearned. There may be something called spontaneous recovery, where after a while, even if they haven't gotten food for a while, you ring the bell, they might still have that salivatory response, all that digestive gastric juices and all that starts to come online. However, right, the behavior is still greatly reduced. So if you're training like a dog or something like that, and they learned an association, but then you kind of stop giving them the treat, period, like you never give them the treat again, that behavior might become extinct. But you could use the reinforcement schedule, like the variable one, right? And like only give them a treat every once in a while for the correct behavior. And that should still be motivating enough for them to continue that behavior.
Every time Pablo heard about it, he thought about feeding his dog.
Probably, yeah, there were probably. There's actually something called second order conditioning, which is when the conditioned stimulus then conditions something else. So it's like, can be working on multiple levels. But yeah, if a bell was ringing every time the light also went on because you were walking in the room, then those could both be paired together and produce the salivation. So it's wise, yes, yes. Okay. All right, got that. All right. Said that. Let me go back to those. Oh, actually, let's. Okay, a couple more things. In associative learning, we talk about generalization and discrimination. Okay, so generalization is when an animal, a human, right, responds similarly to something that has been conditioned, a conditioned stimulus. Okay. Let's say a dog has been conditioned to know that when you make this sound, when you open a bag, they know they're going to get food, right? So that bag opening sound is the conditioned stimulus. Okay, let's say they're in another room and you're in the kitchen and you just open a bag. It's actually a bag of potato chips for you. It's not their dog food bag, but they come running because they've generalized that sound. They're like, a bag is opening. I don't care if it's my food or not, just a bag is opening. I've learned that and I'm going to generalize it to something else. So that is generalization. And then discrimination is, they came and they're like, they're not getting any food, they're not getting any potato chips. So they'll eventually learn to discriminate, right? They're like, oh, that's not the right bag sound. Like I can fine tune my hearing to differentiate between those different bags, right? Sometimes it's impossible to discriminate from opening a can for you, right? With like human food versus a can of cat food. You might not be able to discriminate that. Is anyone familiar with the cheese tax?
Mm-hmm.
What's that? What's the cheese tax? Someone tell me. What is it? Yeah.
When you give a piece of cheese to your dog because you have peas.
Yeah. So what happens is you might open the fridge and the animal has learned that when you open the fridge, like there's food in there, maybe specifically like for them, or maybe you're just getting a piece of food, but they come running every time. So a lot of times people will feel bad and like give them a little piece of cheese or something, or an ice cube every time they open the freezer. Yeah. It's a learned association, right? They're expecting that. Okay. All right, let's go over, we talked about reinforcement. I want to talk a little bit more about punishment. So reinforcement is really meaning to increase the frequency of behavior. Punishment is meant to decrease the frequency of behavior. And we'll talk about positive and negative types of reinforcement and punishment. So there's a lot of different combinations here. Some are more effective than others. But when we say positive, we mean we're adding something. Okay, adding something, I'll give you an example, like giving someone a treat, giving someone candy, that's adding something. Negative means taking something away. Like if you have a headache and then you no longer have a headache, right? You're taking that away, taking away that pain. Okay, so you're gonna actually see this in one of your seminar activities, this little matrix here. So there are positive reinforcement, positive punishment, negative reinforcement, negative punishment. They're all different combinations of increasing or decreasing behavior, adding something, or taking away. Okay. So let's give one example of each. We've talked a lot about positive reinforcement, so that is we're giving a positive to increase behavior, right? You're giving your child money so they can keep getting good grades, right? They're going to be motivated in school, perhaps. Okay. What about positive punishment? You're giving them a punishment to decrease their behavior. An example could be physical punishment, like which is not recommended by anybody in psychology. If you hit your child, right, you might think that will decrease their bad behavior, the behavior you don't want to see. Or if you're late to work and your boss yells at you for being late in front of everyone, that should probably decrease the behavior. You don't want to be late the next time because of that.
Going back to like if parents like hit their children, is that like seems kind of unrelated, but it's like one of those things where it's like, oh, children that deal with like abuse or even mental abuse from their parents become bullies or become them.
Yeah, we're going to talk about social learning theory next, and that's directly related to it. Because, if that's what you're learning is like, this is how I deal with problems is through violence, then that's a learned behavior, right? And then people can display that on the playground or with their peers or with their own children later on. Yeah, absolutely. It's totally related. Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk about in the next slide, why punishment isn't as effective as reinforcement. Okay. Another example, let's see. Negative reinforcement. So take something away to increase behavior. Okay, that's the headache example. So you have a negative thing, you have a headache, you might take some pain reliever, right, to remove that negative. So that would increase your ability to take like an Advil every time you had a headache, right? Because it removes that headache. That's increasing that behavior when it's needed. Okay, and then the last example is negative punishment, which you are removing a positive to decrease behavior. That's like timeout, right? So timeout means that you are getting out of this really reinforcing environment where you have a lot of toys or you're interacting with people, right? In order to decrease the negative or bad behavior, right? The behavior we don't want to see. Maybe you weren't sharing, you weren't being cooperative, maybe you were hitting your siblings, so you're placed in a timeout. Hopefully that would decrease the behavior. It's like, oh no, I want time in, right? I want to be in that environment again. I'll be good. All right, so I think I hope you're seeing there are a lot of applications for parents or how we're interacting with children here. Lots of research on this. So in the short term, punishment might seem to be effective. It might immediately stop a behavior because you're like, ooh, that was scary. Someone yelled at me or someone hit me, like a little bit maybe like traumatized in that moment. So it might cut off like any behavior. And it's like, oh, it worked, right? But if we want long-lasting, kind of like long-term change, reinforcement is much more effective. So that means rewarding kind of the behaviors we do want to see and either ignoring, not paying attention to, or explaining why you don't want to see other types of behaviors. I think we'll get into it more in developmental psychology, but there are connections here with learning. Yeah.
So for like people who do gentle parenting, but a little too gentle to where like the kid just does what they want, and because they use that reinforcement with like giving them a treat or like telling them like, oh, if you sit here and be calm or something, I'll give you a piece of cake, and then they expect that every time. But so then when it doesn't happen, they freak out, and like children that freak out about it.
It's a good point because it's like,
Like, how would you like negotiate that, or like not negotiate that, but like how would you deal with that?
yeah, it's a really good question because ideally what we want to reinforce like over time is more like things like morals and values, right?
Yeah.
Which like don't always have an association with something in the physical world. So ideally with this, like, yeah, you might say giving money is great, but what I really want you to learn is like getting good grades is positive because of these other things, right? It might help you get further in your career. I want you to be happy and healthy later on. So it might not, yeah, it's difficult to teach all of those things, especially with punishment. With reinforcement, it lends itself a little bit easier for people to understand like their behavior and how it's being rewarded and why other behaviors are not rewarded. Because often when we're punished, we may be just stressed out. Like, if we're being punished, we might not be in a place to like think about what we've done or why we've done it or learn from it. So the sympathetic nervous system might be really aroused during that time.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how like a lot of families, like, you start with the positive reinforcement that's like a little, something that they don't want to last forever. Like, oh, I'll give you $2 if you do the dishes. But then like as the kid grows up and like develops this maturity, they're like, oh, it makes mom less stressed when I do the dishes, and then we have more fun, and then like all of these other, or you just kind of have an understanding of like, oh, people appreciate it when I do nice things for them. Like that, I feel like that develops pretty young, and so you don't have to like keep doing that into their teen years because like they start to understand the like mutual respect of a household.
If they start to understand like, hey, if I do something for nice for someone, it also feels good for me, right? And then that becomes a reinforcement too. So you're right, it's developmentally appropriate. It depends on their brain development and all that, and what may work really early on changes over time. Yeah, Paul.
I think you've already said this, but my experience is just be honest, and sometimes you have to be very direct with them.
Yes.
Very direct, and what I constantly tell, I'm just gonna say the people that I work with, it's just to make positive choices and stuff like that, and then I just walk them through like how to do it, like just like.
Yes, being communicative, like having that back and forth communication is really important. Yeah, I agree, and we'll see much more of that because we will talk a lot about parenting coming up. But it's always important we'll learn to also have like, boundaries and consequences. It's not like kids can just do whatever they want and not face any consequences. That's not great either. So we just have to set the rules in place. Everyone agrees on it. Maybe they can even help make some of the rules in terms of what's fair and what's not fair, and then hold people accountable.
Right. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that might be related to the inflation of the negative behavior with a positive result. So the kid might start to learn, oh, if I behave negatively, I can have an opportunity to get that positive reward. And that's something you see a lot with people who try like the gentle parenting thing, but more often than not, it's less about gentle parenting in an intuitive way and more about gentle parenting in a sort of, I guess, laissez-faire way, where it's like, oh, I just want my kid to stop behaving improperly so I can do and have to do what I want to do, right? So the conflation of the negative behavior with a positive result, and then it will be quiet and you'll get your iPad screws, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it can have the opposite effect, or it can work a little bit different than what you want it to happen.
Yeah.
And we see that, right? If someone's having a tantrum and the parent just wants them to stop, then they could give in, right? And
Kids respond, they'll verbally do that.
Yes, yeah. So I'm glad you're making those connections. So we have finished operant learning today. We'll get to observational learning on Monday. Just have a little bit to finish up. But have a good weekend, or I'll see you today or Friday.